Corporate fraud works best in the shadows, behind corporate walls. How does the government bring these wrongdoers to justice? Whistleblowers. These are the stories of those who risk their careers to shine a light on allegations of fraud. Today on Fraud in America.
All right. Welcome to today's episode of Fraud in America. When I do these shows, I oftentimes spend a lot of time researching the backgrounds of our guests. I'll watch other interviews they've done. I'll read any kind of case law that they've been involved with. Today was a lot easier because it's someone I've known for a long, long time. A good friend of mine, John McMickle. He has been wandering the halls of Congress for 30 years. Prior to that, he was the pride of Northwest High School in Clarksville, Tennessee, not too far from where my family grew up in Kentucky. Then went on to, I hate to say it, but the University of Tennessee. Being a Kentucky fan, that pains me. We're friends, even though. Then he went on to American University, where he went to law school, and then after law school, he found his way up to Capitol Hill, where he worked for the Senate Judiciary Committee. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. He was there for 6 years before going over to Winston-Strawn for 10 years, and then he set up his own boutique government relations firm in D.C. He's been advising Taxpayers Against Fraud and the Anti-Fraud Coalition for almost 25 years. That's where I've gotten to know John over the years as he's helped to advise us down the path. John, we got a lot of stuff to talk about. I appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. And I'm glad you didn't have to read too much of my backstory. It'd have been a real snooze fest, but I'm happy to be here. Awesome.
So, John, if you could take me back a little bit here, why did you decide to go down the path of lobbying, or actually, let's go back before that. Why did you decide to go up to the Capitol Hill and work on the Senate Judiciary Committee?
Well, I graduated law school in 1994, the fall of 1994. And as you may recall, historically, Republicans took over the House and Senate in those elections, which meant that there were job opportunities in the winter of 1995 as the new Congress was coming in. And I had sort of gotten a little bit involved in conservative politics and wanted to sort of try my hand at being a counsel in the Senate Judiciary Committee. This was straight out of law school. And at the time, I thought of it as just a great opportunity. And I wanted to sort of test my mettle and see if I could hack it. So that's kind of where I went. I'm generally sort of instinctively conservative. I'm not overly ideological. So I was able to work with most kind of, center-right kind of issues in a way that was consistent with my own personal views. And, I ended up I worked for the committee, but reported to Senator Grassley, who was a, terrific boss to work for. So that's how I got to my start.
So during this time, the 90s, the False Claims Act is starting to ramp up, right? Mm-hmm. It's starting to, a lot of settlements are coming in, a lot of cases are starting to get on people's radar screens. What was this period like as far as, kind of seeing the False Claims Act evolve from your end?
Well, I think what stands out to me the most from that period is this was the beginning of the evolution of the False Claims Act as primarily a tool aimed at defense procurement fraud. You may remember the 1986 amendments came in during the Reagan defense buildup, and there was a lot of overbilling, misbilling, however you want to describe it, among defense contractors. And that by when the Berlin Wall came down, it's hard to imagine now, but when the Berlin Wall came down, there was a lot of talk at the time of the peace dividend and that we were going to reduce defense spending. And the federal government did reduce defense spending somewhat throughout the 1990s. But at the same time, spending started to increase for healthcare programs. And so I really remember sort of being lobbied by hospitals and nursing homes and the companies in that sector as they started to bump into the False Claims Act. It was at that time kind of new to them, and they didn't like it.
Mm.
Senator Grassley, I was his representative in a lot of these meetings, just didn't have a lot of sympathy for their perspective. Just because something is new doesn't mean you get to violate the law, or that Congress is going to change the law to immunize your business practices. So that really is sort of one of the trends that started to take off in the mid to late 90s. I also remember some of the very first what I would call financial fraud applications of the False Claims Act. Yield burning was a particular issue in the late 90s. And that seemed at the time a little bit like a one-off, but obviously with the 2008 financial crisis and the mortgage meltdown and all the fraud that went with that, that too has become a new use case for the False Claims Act.
I think a lot of people are aware of the role of the legislative branch in making laws that are signed by the president, the old song that you sing in elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people aren't aware of the oversight that goes
Mm-hmm.
on Capitol Hill. Can you talk about that role, especially when you were on the Senate Judiciary Committee? What does that mean, oversight?
Well, so oversight. So Congress has under the Constitution, has the authority to examine how its laws are being actually implemented by the executive branch. Oversight does, at least in theory, have to be tied to some sort of legislative purpose. So the sort of constitutional rationale for oversight is that Congress wants to see if the laws that are written are being implemented correctly, whether or not there are flaws or what some people might term as loopholes that need to be corrected. You're not allowed to do oversight merely for the purpose of embarrassing somebody. You have to have what's called a valid legislative purpose. But and Senator Grassley was and is very strongly committed to oversight. And it's simply a matter of asking, especially when talking about False Claims Act oversight, how is the Justice Department doing? How many cases are they intervening in? How many cases are they declining? What is the total number of amount of money brought in any given fiscal year? So you want to look at some basic components of just assessing whether a law that you passed is actually having the intended effect.
Mm. I'm sure in your old role, you had a lot of people come to you with concerns about particular cases or matters. What is the threshold level that you were looking at as far as something that was worthy of further investigation or raising it to Senator Grassley's attention?
Well, you'd wanted to, the first thing, and I think the staff now, and got to remember the World Wide Web was just really taking off in the late 90s, in the mid to late 90s. One of the things that you want to do as a sort of staffer who has somebody come to you is you want to make sure that the person that is talking to you is both kind of on the level, but also balanced. I mean, you get a number of people that come to you with really just kind of wacky thoughts and arguments, and you don't ever want your boss to be embarrassed by something like that. So one of the initial things you do is you try and weed people out that are just not stable. So a strategy that I used at the time, I think this has now been more routinized, is just ask people to write everything down and send it to me in an email. I think nowadays committees and congressional offices have web pages where you can fill a form out. If if you're able to get through that initial hurdle, fill a form out, and it seems to read well and it doesn't exude some sort of instability, that's the first thing you look at. The second thing you look at is you want to have a sense of whether or not the policy issues, not the facts of the specific case, but whether there's a policy issue involved. So, for instance, I remember very clearly working on issues related to when the government would pay a relator share or not, because from time to time, DOJ would try and argue with relator and relator's counsel about what the share should be, and try tactics like, well, we'll release some money if you agree to waive your rights to argue for additional money. And that struck us as inconsistent with the incentives of the public-private partnership, and we'd get involved there. Other issues would relate to, I remember a very specific case related to how air ambulances could build a Medicare program. Do you bill by the statute mile? Do you bill by the nautical mile? There was a great lack of clarity in the regulations. And so that caught our attention because in those kinds of situations where the regulations are just unclear, it can be hard to make a true False Claims Act case because not you know not like bending over backwards to sort of like take the defendant's perspective, but if you really actually don't know, it's hard to build the scienter case, and that's on the government to clarify. I mean, it's on the government to put out clear directions so that you know exactly what you're supposed to do. And then if you don't do it, then the False Claims Act absolutely comes to play. So we were sensitive to the fact that the government needed to have clear rules and regulations around what is or isn't billable under Medicare, for instance.
This idea of trying to reduce your allegations to a one pager is something we advise potential clients to do. What a great exercise! And if people can't do that, their thoughts may not be in alignment with the potential case. So, absolutely. It's very interesting. Looking back on some of the things you worked on when you were up on the Hill. Bankruptcy, cybercrime, False Claims Act, and all the things that we touch on. How were you able to keep all that straight? I mean, just in our world, we dive into the False Claims Act, but you seem like you had your hand in a lot of things.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Jeb, because that goes to particularly if anybody's listening to this and they want to sort of bring their case or situation to the attention of staffers or congressional offices. The phrase we use is drinking from a fire hose. One of the skills a successful congressional office develops is the ability to sort of multitask a lot of different items at the same time. But that means when you're the advocate and you come to an office and want some help, you need to understand that the person you're talking to had a bunch of meetings before they talk to you and will have a bunch of meetings after they're done talking to you. So you need to be very disciplined and clear in what your presentation is, what your request is, and what the rationale for the request is. You raise a good point. What tends to happen in congressional offices is both the members and the staff get really good at high functioning ADD, I would call it. I mean, you really have to be able to pivot between a lot of different issues instantly, and your mind has to come up to speed fairly quickly. But yeah, that's a real challenge. And again, when if anybody listening to this wants to talk to congressional staffers, just remember that the kind of time pressures that they're under, and if you are able to get a moment of their time, don't waste it.
I remember whenever we started working together, that's one of the things you really worked with me on. Make sure what are the points you want to get across, lead with them, back up, and 30 minutes tops. We got to get in and out because there's so many other things happening. Yep.
Always practice your elevator speech, Jeb. Always,
100%. In your sleep. My wife's tired of hearing it while I sleep. So you eventually found your way over to Winston Strawn. You became a partner, a large law firm. Why did you decide to make that jump in 2001?
At that time, Senator Grassley, who I was really sort of answering to, was going to become the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. And to be completely honest, I had the opportunity to become a tax counsel to the Finance Committee, and I just was not interested in taxes. I'd done it for 5 or 6 years. There's a high rate of burnout among congressional staff because of all the things we just discussed previously. And I was kind of exhausted and wanted to see what private sector was like. So it was not a more complex decision than that.
Oh, great. And so what were your primary roles whenever you went over to Winston Strawn? What were some of the clients or matters you worked on?
A variety of things. I primarily did lobbying. I did some traditional legal practice. I tried to keep that to an absolute minimum. But I did lobbying. Winston at that time had there was a former transportation secretary there. So there was a lot of work you did that the firm did for, say, trucking companies, airlines, things of that nature. I did quite a bit of work for generic. That firm also represents generic drug companies in their patent litigation against branded pharma companies. So I did quite a bit of work on various. I don't want to go too far. Various kind of unfair practices that branded pharma companies would engage in order to try and artificially extend patent rights or FDA exclusivities to forestall competition. And that experience, I have to say, made me even more of a free market person than I already was, because essentially at least some significant component in the sort of sky high drug prices that we all know and love is that there's not a functioning marketplace. So there's not competition. If you think about what an FDA exclusivity or a patent right is, it's a way of preventing price competition in the first place. And there may be some good reasons to do that on a limited basis so that drug companies can recoup investments and lost investments. But it became very clear that a lot of the branded companies, not all of them, kind of got addicted to the money that comes from having no competition and would do things like change the shape of their pill so that they could get a new patent on this new on basically the same old drug and prevent consumers and federal healthcare programs from benefiting from lower drug costs.
Mm. And during this time, you were advising our sister organization, Taxpayers Against Fraud, and TAP Education Fund. Can you explain what is a lobbyist? Just general terms, what does a lobbyist do?
Well, I mean, basically, it's a fancy sales job. The life experience that I had that most prepared me for being a lobbyist or government relations professional, however you want to gussy it up, was selling tires and batteries at Sears Automotive. I mean, this is a sales job. You have a client, in the case of Taxpayers Against Fraud, a client that cares about protecting the False Claims Act and other rewards and whistleblower programs, and you need to go to Congress and explain what you want changed or what you want not changed, and sort of sell them on the idea of it. So that if you think about it, a client hires you because they have an issue, a policy-related issue that they want somebody's attention on. People like me develop networks of contacts, and we arrange introductions and figure out how to package and describe issues in a way that will resonate with the intended audience. So in the case of the False Claims Act, one of the challenges over the years has been coming up with pro-False Claims Act, pro-qui tam arguments that will appeal to people that are not naturally aligned with the False Claims Act. It does not do TAF or the Relators Bar much good to get the choir really, really wound up. You have to convert the heathens. And so we spent a lot of time talking to people that are skeptical of the False Claims Act, in figuring out ways to describe what the False Claims Act does, examples of what the False Claims Act can do that doesn't just excite the people that are already our friends.
So, John, at some point you decided to go out on your own and leave Winston Strawn. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I do not have bad things to say about Winston. It was a terrific firm, but it was a big law firm, and it was getting bigger at the time, and conflicts became much more difficult. Conflicts, honestly, related to my representation of TAF, Taxpayers Against Fraud, became complicated, and I just assumed that it would be worth my time and effort to try and just hang my own shingle. I have to say the firm was very friendly to me as I left, and continues to this day to provide, sort of overflow work to me. So it was a friendly parting of the ways. I think it's because even a successful solo lobbyist, which I was when I left, even if you're successful, you're less than an asterisk in their financial accounting. So I wasn't viewed as any kind of competition. I didn't want to be competition, and they didn't see me that way. I think had I tried to go to another law firm, it would have been a different exit experience. But that wasn't my experience, and I've done this now since January of 2011, and it's been a fairly terrific experience, I have to say.
So any general trends that you've identified over the last 30 years on whatever front you want to talk about?
Well, I guess what I was thinking about that in preparation for this interview. And I think the thing that is striking to me right now is the way the parties are realigning themselves, both in Congress, but nationally, and how that might affect the sort of the False Claims Act landscape. So I think essentially we're seeing the rise of populism, both on the right and on the left, There is, though, this is my judgment. People can disagree. There is a difference between, though, a populism on the right and a populism on the left. Both of them are concerned with concentrated corporate power. And when you're a populist on the left, you have a ready-made solution. Your ready-made solution is government regulation and government rules. Senator Warren has recently been in the news because she's skeptical of mergers between Subway and another sandwich shop. So she wants the government to come in and take a hard look at whether or not these kinds of transactions are pro-competition or pro-public good. It's a different calculus, I think, when you talk about a populism on the right, because a populism on the right is concerned with corporate power, especially nowadays, but also concerned with government overreach. And so it's a more complicated policy situation for the more right-wing or conservative populists, because you don't like big corporations having so much power, but you also don't like the government having so much power. So you have to come up with some sort of solution that is that balances those two competing equities that exist on the right but not on the left. And I have to say, I think this is a good mix for qui tam, because one of the ways for a conservative populist who doesn't like big corporate power, but also doesn't like the government, to sort of provide a check on corporate power without also empowering the government is through private rights of action like qui tam. I mean, qui tam is the OG private right of action. And you have, if you paid attention in the last Congress and this Congress, there are an increasing number of proposals by Republicans, by conservative Republicans who have not been always open to this concept, to create private rights of action, because they would rather have a private right of action than empower the CFPB or empower the Department of Labor or Health and Human Services. And that issue mix, that landscape, I think is if we can skillfully interact with it, can be very beneficial to the sort of the concept of qui tam. I think it creates some background noise that will be helpful to both protecting qui tam and the other whistleblower programs, and also strengthening and enlarging them where the bar and the practicing attorneys see a need.
Any general observations about what's going on Capitol Hill right now, how divided Congress feels, and the kind of inability to get anything through Congress right now? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's undeniably true that Congress is deeply divided. But I will say, so is the country, Jeb. So it isn't like we have a unified country and we have divisive members of Congress. We have a deeply divided country, and our Congress simply reflects those divisions. We have, especially in the House of Representatives, members from deep blue districts whose political incentives are to go as far to the left as they can, and we have members from deep red districts whose political incentive is to go as far to the right as they can. And people argue a lot about how we got here. Some people think redistricting could be part of it, but I just don't know that I agree that redistricting is like the primary explanation. What I sort of think is that just like the political parties are realigning, we're going through some sort of social reorganization in this country, and there is a divide developing and widening between sort of educated, knowledge, white collar class workers and blue collar workers that I think is both part cause and part effect of the division that we have. And until that calms itself down, I really don't know what the solution to excessive partisanship in Congress is.
So about a year ago, I received an advance copy of this fascinating book called The Block, A Cryptocurrency Private Eye Mystery, written by John McMickle. Fascinating read, available on Amazon. Tell us about your book.
Well, based on the way I just described the conservative populist position, which is something that I personally share, it's a book about what would happen if worldwide public confidence in fiat currency, that's government issued currency, were to collapse. And the story is sort of about set in a world where government currencies have collapsed. A type of cryptocurrency has taken its place, but those cryptocurrencies have been captured by oligarchs, and the oligarchs are attempting to sort of like feud with each other, attempting to expand their control beyond just economic matters to political matters. And the book is set up as kind of a neo-noir kind of private detective story about a private detective who's searching for some missing cryptocurrency and stumbles into this civil war between the oligarchs and the remnants of the federal government attempting to reassert national control over monetary policy. Hopefully it's a good and enjoyable read, but it really it was described to me as a friend of mine as a libertarian fever dream. Because the enemies in this particular, sort of the antagonists are both the government and oligarchs, which is actually how I see the world. And but again, I hope it's not didactic and like a boring lecture, because it's not intended to be. It's intended to be a fast-paced kind of mystery, sort of like think of the Maltese Falcon meets Philip K. Dick and cryptocurrency. So,
is there going to be a sequel?
No, but I do have another one coming out early next year, not related to cryptocurrency, related to the origins of Pentecostal prayer language in alternative universes, called the Angel Cipher. Be happy to share that with you, Jeb, when it's done.
Well, it's a fascinating read. I encourage everybody to go out and to buy the block off of Amazon.com. It really is a fascinating read and very timely given what's happening in the world today around cryptocurrency. So I look forward to your next book, John.
Thank you, Jeb.
So John, getting your crystal ball out,
mm-hmm.
Where do you see things heading on the hill or in the political landscape over the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, 5 to 10 years. That's a I'd rather stick with 5 than 10. I'm usually like not as completely wrong in the shorter term. I think that the country is going to kind of go back and forth between sort of a Republican Congress and president and a Democratic Congress and president until somebody wins. Essentially, somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. It seems to me there are extended periods in our political history, where, we kind of like meld things together and there's a sort of happy medium. But there are also periods where the conflicts are simply irreconcilable and somebody has to come out on top. I don't know right now who is going to win or lose, but I mean, barring the entry of some unknown charismatic figure who can bring us all together, I think somehow either the sort of progressive left or the conservative right have got to win a decisive victory. And once one party has won a decisive victory and sets the direction for the country, that will calm us down for a bit. But until that time hits, I think we're going to seesaw. Our country is going to look more like a parliamentary democracy than the kind of representative democracy that we're used to. But I don't think that will be forever. I think that nothing lasts forever, especially in politics. And so something will come. Something will change. The other thing that might happen, Jeb, is if you look at demographics, as voters enter the voting age and then sort of start the phase of their life where they're getting married and they have families and they start to worry about all of the mundane details of household formation. I do wonder if that right now we have between the millennials and the Gen Z, we have a very large young cohort. As that cohort starts to age a little, I wonder if that aging process will bring some stability to the political arena as well.
Very fascinating. Well, John, you and I could talk for hours. I appreciate you coming on the show. A lot of our viewers, listeners, and members are aware of what we do on the judicial side and the executive side. So I thought I'd let them look behind the curtain to see what we do on the legislative side. And the person behind the curtain is John McMickle. So, John, I appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Jeb.
Thank you. Until next episode of Fraud in America, if you see something, say something. And when that doesn't work, it's time to do something.
If you believe you have witnessed fraud against the government or fraud on the financial markets, we encourage you to visit our website at taf.org, where you will find a directory of member attorneys who represent whistleblowers across the country. On our website, you will also find additional information about our nation's various whistleblower laws and programs, and a way to donate to our organization as we step forward in spreading information about whistleblower programs. This episode was edited and produced by Rachel Brooks, and our theme song is by Connor Chaos. A big thank you to our TAF staff and researchers of James King, Emma Bass, Jackie DeMar, Kate Scanlon, Max Boldman. Fraud in America is a project of Taxpayers Against Fraud Education Fund. The opinions expressed on today's show belong solely to the guest and are not necessarily endorsed by the organization. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Fraud in America.